On today's Technobabble, tips for the old dog, just try it. The introduction to podcasting church, and this time I mean it, much, much more.
This is Tech No Babble, your weekly source for church video and graphics news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. And now here's your host, Paul Clifford.
Well, welcome back again to the TrinityDigitalMedia.com studios. I, of course, am Paul Clifford, your host for Technobabble. So I just wanted to start off by giving you some tips. You see, I've recently acquired a new MacBook Pro. You can see it in the corner here if you're watching the video version. If you're listening to the audio, you might just imagine a computer. Just imagine it. Are you there? Imagine it. Okay, anyway. So I haven't had the horsepower to do stuff with motion before on a regular basis. I've been with Final Cut, 10, 11 years now, but motion was fairly new to me, so I thought that I'd decide to bring that out and see what I could learn. Well, I'm not ancient, I'm 37, but if you're in your 20s, that might feel ancient, but there are a lot of things that I still don't know and want to know. So I thought I'd tell you just the steps that I went through to learn a little bit about motion. Step one, I did a Google search on some tutorials. There's some excellent screencasts available for free on YouTube, made by people like myself. And so I went there and I just watched a few of them and I tried to do what they did. And so I guess that's step number one, is find some screencasts of the software you want to use if you're an old dog and trying to learn new tricks. Step two is I started to play around. And so I tried all sorts of different stuff to see exactly what it was and just started playing. Now step three is what I think is really important. And that is to create for yourself a little project. A project that requires you to test the limits of what you can do at a certain point. In motion, this seemed fairly obvious to me that what I should do is make motion loops. So that's exactly what I've done. I've got 8 or 9 of them now. Some of them I like more than others. I've got one that you'll see at the end of the show as part of my new outro that I'm really a big fan of. Actually, there are 3 things that I made in motion as part of this. The TrinityDigitalMedia.com logo, which I've made in 3D, the Technobabble name, and the background itself. So that's just an example of some stuff that you can do with this software. I'm a big fan of it. I'm very excited about what I've learned thus far, and I've got some more stuff in my head that I'm just excited to get out. I just haven't had a chance to yet. So hopefully I'll have something fun for you to look at later. And we'll talk about that later. But first, just try it right after an introduction to podcasting church. Right after this.
Music for Technobabble was generously provided by Firefly. Visit their website, fireflyrock.com.
So one thing I try and do is I try and learn lessons every day and see how they apply to what I do in church tech. Um, Something that is humbling to know, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's probably better that I be humble than be arrogant, is that I really don't know everything about everything. I quite often think I know a lot more about stuff than I do, and that's an admission on my part. So this one of these things happened to me on uh, Tuesday of this week. I'm recording on Thursday, so it's fairly fresh. My wife's grandmother passed away, so we went back to her home in Evansville, Indiana, to visit with the family, go to the funeral, all that stuff. I was going to say all that fun stuff, but it didn't seem apropos. While we were there, the brakes on my wife's car were squeaking, and I just assumed that they were the brake pads that I needed to take a look at. I'd also noticed that there was the light on the dash that says brakes was also on, but it seemed to stop fine, so I wasn't too worried, but I thought, well, I'll look at that later on this week. Well, while we were there, my father-in-law heard the squeaking, and he quizzed me on it, and he said, "Have you checked the fluid?" Now, checking the fluid is his answer to a lot of stuff, so I immediately dismissed it, which I shouldn't have done. And so he checked the brake fluid, and it's true, it was a little low, so he topped it off, and wouldn't you know, the brakes quit squeaking and the brake light quit being on. So that just brought something to my mind. You might remember that my previous job before I became self-employed was doing tech support. And occasionally I'd just have guys on the line and they'd say, "No, it can't be that." And I know that it was. I knew it that it was. So what I invariably did was I would devise a test to prove to them that it was. So to eliminate the thing that they thought was the cause of the problem. And that would take a little bit longer, and then they'd do it, and then they'd eventually come to the conclusion, oh, well, I guess it's not programming after all. I guess I do have a wire plugged in the wrong place, even though, oh yeah, I did change the wiring. Right after you told me you didn't? Well, no, it was before I told you I didn't. Oh, okay. We all make mistakes. But it just came to my mind that if they just tried it, we both could have saved 5-10 minutes of our time. And so that's something that it occurred to me, when you're trying to fix something, if it doesn't do any harm, why not just try something? Why not just try it? Why didn't I just check the brake fluid and top it off? Wouldn't have hurt. I mean, 2 minutes of my time. It would have taken longer to pop the hood than to check the fluid level. And then I would have seen, oh, it is a little low. I would have thought, well, ounce of prevention. I would have topped it off, and then the problem would have been solved. Likewise, whenever you're in a troubleshooting situation, if someone says, hey, have you checked thus and so? Even if you don't think that's it, why don't you check it? I mean, it's one thing if checking it requires you to tear down the entire system, which took 2 weeks to build. That's one thing. It's another thing if it's flicking a switch, checking a checkbox. It's worth trying. You never know. So I guess that's my advice to you. Next time, just try it. What harm can it do? Up next, an introduction to Podcasting Church, right after this.
This is Phil Graves calling from our nation's capital, and you're listening to Tech No Babble.
Well, we're back. So as promised, I have Podcasting Church. I've finished doing some more edits on it, and I thought that I'd read you the introduction. This will eventually become its own podcast, but I thought I'd give you a sneak peek as my loyal viewers and listeners of an introduction to Podcasting Church coming out real soon. Introduction. May of 2005. I was pretty unhappy with one fact in particular. One of my favorite shows is dead. The screensavers has been replaced by something called Attack of the Show on G4 Tech TV. The show that used to have good help and how-tos now has fun, but not nearly as educational topics. I mentioned this to a friend who told me that the guys from the old Tech TV had gotten together to start a podcast. I didn't know what that meant. I did know that I didn't own an iPod, but that I wanted to hear tech news and tips, so I started to research. Eventually, I found something with no name because Leo Laporte and his friends had been warned not to use their original idea, Revenge of the Screensavers. In the following weeks, this show became TWIT, This Week in Tech. At first, the technology was hard to use. You had to download a special piece of software called a podcatcher. They were few in number and fewer on the Mac, which is what I used. About the time that I was going to give up, something unexpected happened. Apple released an update to iTunes that added podcasting. Once I'd added a few podcasts, it became obvious that this was a great medium. By its very nature, it was time-shifted. The barrier to entry was low, it was portable, and I loved it. Having listened to quite a few podcasts, I started to think about creating one of my own. An interview on Podcast 411 gave me two pieces I needed. First, I heard someone advise to podcast on your passion. Second, he said something like, just start. It doesn't matter how good you are because you'll start bad and improve from there. In July 2005, I started Babel. It started bad, but has gotten better. Not great, but better. I hope that it helps people. How does talking about communication technologies help people? In 2000, my life changed when I realized that I was uniquely made especially to be someone who does technical things to help advance God's plans. I used to feel broken, without a niche in life. Now I feel that there's a specific plan for me, a plan that helps lives and eternities change, a plan that will happen when the time is just right. In early 2001, I saw it for the first time. Jim is his name. He credited a video I made with being something that helped him come to know Jesus. In 2007, my church started an online campus. It was something that we wouldn't have been able to do except I'd heard on a podcast about a new service called Ustream.tv. A group of people who wouldn't go to church can go online and hear about the love of Jesus and that they can get a do-over, safe in the knowledge that they can't make him stop loving them with the mistakes that they make. Tech is power. It enables us to do things that would have been magic or science fiction just a few years ago. I can make my own radio show in my spare room in Nicholasville, Kentucky. After some preparation, I can send it anywhere in the world, or rather people from all over the world can listen to it almost immediately. For almost no money, someone can take a private passion and turn it into a message seen worldwide. Time zones aren't an obstacle. Your audience can listen whenever they want. This democratizes speech in a way that we have never seen before in human history. I can be heard by more people than a king or a president just a few years ago. Now, the limitation isn't getting it distributed. The internet has changed that. Now the limitation is standing out. Amongst the din of millions of voices, how will your message be heard? What if 1,000 people listen to what you have to say? What if people from the other side of the earth pick up on an idea and use it? It's impossible to imagine what would happen. This book is about my journey from confused seminary geek to Christian technologist just as much as it's about how your church can leverage the power of the internet as a tool for good. The same technology that teaches terrorists to build bombs and shows teenage boys porn can be used to bring about positive change in a life. I pray you'll join me on this journey as I write both the how and the why. Up next, you'll want to stick around for one more thing, the much, much more I usually talk about, right after this.
This is Joel Osborne of Milton, Wisconsin, and you're listening to Tech No Babble.
So I hope you stuck around. Of course, you wouldn't know it if you didn't, but what you should know is if you go to trinitydigitalmedia.com, I have put up links to 6 of the video loops that I made. Now keep in mind these are early attempts, but one of them in particular, the one at the end of this podcast that you'll see behind, that's kind of a droplets of liquid stained glass on invisible mirrors or invisible windows. I think it's 316A. You'll know it when you see it. That's my personal favorite. Now there are 2D loops and 3D loops and some with muted colors. But go over to trinitydigitalmedia.com and I have free 6 SD loops for you to use in your church. And I hope you use them to help change eternity.